Welcome to the Discover podcast, where we view faith as a discovery journey with Jesus to help you become the person God created you to be. Hey everybody, welcome back to this episode of the Discover podcast. We're so glad that you are here. I'm really excited about today because we have a very special guest with us today, a very special guest who was with us a few weeks ago, not on the podcast, but at our church. I'm joined by my seminary professor, Dana Harris. She was here a couple weeks ago preaching at our church, leading us in a staff retreat, doing some other teaching on Sunday afternoon. And so, Dana, we're so glad to have you here with us today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So oftentimes when you go to different places, sometimes you have like pre-conversations about, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the things that we're going to see and talk about. I don't know how often you have like post-event or post-traveling conversations, but why don't you just share a little bit with us about how it was being here and what are some of the things you kind of took away from the time with our church?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I love to preach, so that's always fun for me to be in the pulpit and also just to be able to be in a different context and different church. I always feel like it expands my vision of who God is when I see different churches and how worship is done in different ways. So that's always exciting. I loved the Acts survey and the lunch. There were really good questions. I loved going through the book of Acts.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved, we could have gone lunch to dinner.
Yeah.
It was fun. I mean, it's just a wonderful part of God's word. Then I also really enjoyed the staff retreat on Tuesday where we went through Revelation, kind of in a different way, not so much teaching, just more on reflections of Jesus in Revelation. And what I really love about that is it helps people to see Revelation in probably a different way.
Mm-hmm.
We all have, kind of some ideas of what we think Revelation is doing. And then to find how it's just so focusing on worshiping the Lamb, I think is really refreshing for people.
Yeah, I think that was a big takeaway for our staff. And I'm sure people who are hearing this conversation right now, and they're like, oh, you talked through Revelation with the staff. They're probably thinking that would have been a real interesting conversation to be a part of. And it was great. It was, I think for many years, and even still to this day, I would say I'm intimidated by Revelation. I used to be intimidated by the book of Romans. And then I just said, it was like this last minute decision in August, the spring, the fall was coming, and I hadn't picked what we were going to be teaching on in the fall. And I don't know why I chose Romans, but I did. And then I found that actually studying through it and working through it made it far less intimidating. And the way that you kind of brought us through Revelation, again, for me that day, it was like, oh yeah, this isn't as intimidating as I thought it was. Although I still don't think I would just want to offhand go teach it. But yeah, it was a great, great day. Maybe sometimes when you're in places, for many people who would have experienced you on a Sunday morning, you're there, you teach, and then you're gone. Some people who were with us that day didn't really get a chance to know you personally. So maybe you could share a little of your story, and then we'll talk more about the work that you're doing and kind of what's next for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I have kind of, I don't know. I think it's interesting, but I was born and raised in San Diego, and I was not raised in a Christian household. So I was raised Catholic. I went to the Catholic Church. So I always knew there was God, and that was a really big thing. I'm really thankful for that. I can honestly say I can't recall a time in my life when I didn't really feel God's presence with me. And so I'm grateful for that. Again, I wasn't really kind of raised in a context where a lot of things were explained or kind of your typical evangelical household. When I was 15, this is kind of part of my story, but when I was 15, my dad left our family, and the neighbors across the street invited me to go to a Billy Graham crusade.
Mm.
And so I went, and I really heard the gospel clearly, although I have to say I went forward to receive Christ probably because I didn't want to disappoint the people who brought me.
Mm.
What I was supposed to do, but somehow God honored that. He met me, he honored that. And so thankfully during my time in high school, I hung out with Christians. I wasn't really discipled, didn't know much about the Protestant world. When I went to university, I went to the Newman Center, which is the Catholic fellowship. And it wasn't really until I was coming back so I went to school in Northern California. I was driving back down to San Diego, and I just really felt this prompting. And I just said, Lord, if there are any Christians in San Diego, you have to connect me with them because I need to have fellowship this summer.
Mm.
And I didn't even know what I was actually saying, to be honest, but But there was this, gal in high school, I just remember this so clearly. We had known each other since kindergarten, and she was pretty wild in high school. I mean, kind of out there, pretty wild on some of the things she was doing. And so when I got back from my freshman year, I was in a card store and I saw her down the aisle and I thought, oh, okay, well, this would be good to just kind of chit chat and get caught up and see how she's doing. But I wasn't really anticipating very much of that interaction. So we chatted for about 2 seconds. And then she said, I can't wait to tell you what Jesus Christ has been doing in my life. And I was like, wow, I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
So that summer at College Avenue Baptist Church, I went through kind of a formal discipleship program. And then my sophomore year, when I went back up to school, I went to a Presbyterian church. And then I also got involved with Young Life. And I didn't know anything about Young Life, but that's a completely different story. But basically, I think the Lord discipled me by meeting with these high school girls who had all these questions about the Bible, and I didn't know a thing.
Hmm.
So they'd ask their questions. I'd go talk to everybody I knew, read as much in the Bible, try to figure it out, and then come back the next week and share something with them. My junior year, I studied in Paris. I was accepted for a study program in Paris. And I like to joke that this was really how I got to know denominations because I went to a French speaking Pentecostal church, swinging from the rafters, slain in the spirit, name it, it was going on. And I didn't really understand a lot of that, but they loved me and they really cared for me. Then I went to a French speaking Baptist church for some solid teaching. And then I went to an English speaking Anglican fellowship just so I could have some English fellowship. So I kind of laugh because, I mean, that was my big exposure to Protestant denominations. And then I ended up at the end of my junior year, when I came back, my senior year, I was involved in a non denominational church. So it's kind of like it was all there. But I'm really thankful for that church, Peninsula Bible Church on the San Francisco Bay Peninsula, really grounded me. It was a church that was really focused on teaching. I learned Greek. I taught Greek for 15 years while I was there, or maybe longer, but I ended up working with junior high kids and spent about 8 years working with junior high kids and really fell in love with it because, I always joke, if you can teach junior high kids, you can teach anyone, anything, anywhere, anytime. It's
That's pretty
just,
true.
and we taught them, we were really insistent. We went through books of the Bible with them. So it wasn't just, kind of babysitting. We were really teaching them how to study. So that's a little bit of my background. I double majored in college in international relations and also French because I wanted to go into the State Department and always thought that I would be living overseas in some capacity. I ended up doing a lot of short-term missions. I did a lot of things. I did a lot of technical stuff, like IT kind of stuff, because I wanted to get into closed countries. And so that's always been a real passion of mine is theological education in places where it's not very accessible. Like for one, I was able to teach in an underground seminary in Beijing, China, which was really pretty cool to be with these people who really wanted to be trained. So that's kind of a little bit of the background. I guess I could pause there, but there is a connection between wanting to go into the State Department and then end up doing what I'm doing in a seminary. But I'll throw that
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Why don't you? Because that's a bit of a different career path, right? To go to this from the State Department and be like, oh, I'm going to go teach in a seminary. So how did you bridge that gap? Like, how? Because obviously you're not in the State Department unless you are in some undercover way as a seminary professor. But I don't think that's the case.
No, it's funny. Well, it's kind of a long story, but at one point in time, I ended up coordinating a program that brought young diplomats over from former Soviet bloc countries. So right after the Berlin Wall came down in the 90s, and I had been in some of those countries when they were still communist countries. There was a lot of interest in bringing these young individuals over for exposure to Western style economics and government and things like that. And so this was through Stanford University, and I was coordinating that program. And it gave me a lot of opportunities to go to Washington, D.C. I actually got to go to the State Department many times and was actually able to go into the Oval Office. So some kind of fun things. But it also helped me to see that really wasn't that wasn't going to be the place where I'd be the freest to do what I'm most passionate about. And what I'm most passionate about is really equipping the people of God to be in God's word.
Hmm.
That's what I love to do. And that's what I had been doing all along. I had a couple of just a couple of life circumstances where I thought I was going in one direction, all those doors closed. And so I was kind of like, okay, Lord, what's next? And, I was kind of like, I'll go anywhere in the world and my exceptions were except Los Angeles or the Midwest.
Hmm.
And so here I am in the Midwest coming up on 20 years. But I think what I love about being in a seminary, and particularly being in a seminary near an airport like O'Hare, is that the international students come here. We have a
Mm.
lot of international students, but I get to go a lot of places. I love that. Really, again, my passion is really equipping the people of God. I do things in the academy. Next week I'll be in Boston for professional meetings. I'll be presenting papers, doing all those kinds of things. But what really, really gets me going is how do I love to see God's people just start falling in love with God's word. And that's really what gets me going.
Yeah. So so you were in California still when you were pursuing the State Department, and then did you have to go on from there? Obviously, you went on to get a PhD, and did you do that out in California, or did you do that once you moved to the Midwest?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I came to Trinity so my undergraduate degrees were in international relations and French. Not going to be helpful to get into a PhD program for New Testament. So I came to Trinity originally to do master's level work so that I could apply for a PhD program. And my goal, I had this perfect plan. I just thought it was so good, is that I would come to Trinity, get my master's, and then I would go to the UK for a PhD program. I'd meet the man of my dreams, live happily ever after in the UK or somewhere in Europe. I wasn't too picky. We could do UK, Europe, either one's fine. And I just thought it was a great plan. I really
Yeah.
did. But as it turned out, the Lord had a different plan, and that plan actually was to get my PhD at Trinity, which was a real surprise. It was a fantastic program, still is a fantastic program, but it was a surprise to me that I would be in Northern Illinois for so long. Just I don't know. I mean, I have just I love what I do. I love teaching. I love equipping, people like you. I mean, that's just a huge privilege for me to be able to be a small part of somebody's life, and then to see what God ends up doing with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I told you that, when you were here that there was a handful of things that I just grabbed on from what you taught me that have, like, stuck with me, and I recall those things. One of them is a Bible passage, one of them is a practice of listening, one of them is, I said 3 things, and it's escaping me. That's what's happening more and more as I get older. It'll come to me probably, like, right near the end, and I'll be sure to share it, but one was a passage in Mark 3, one was a practice of listening, and I will recall the other one at some point. But yes, you have impacted me in a big way, and it's just been fun to now be able to reconnect.
I love that passage in Mark. It's one of
Mhm.
my favorite passages, Mark 3:14. And just for the sake of your listeners, I'll just
Yes.
say it's when Jesus calls the 12, the first reason he calls them is so that they can be with him.
Mhm.
Second reason is, "Oh, by the way, I've got some work for you to do."
Yeah.
But the primary reason he wants them to be with him is literally so that they can be with him. And I just love that emphasis on presence and personal relationship.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was how you opened our very first class. It might have been, if not the very first class that I had with you, it was maybe within that first week. It was very early on, and it just struck me like I'd never thought about because I was at school to learn, and I was at school because I had work to do. I was at school because like I had this calling on my life, and just to begin very early on with like, hey, don't neglect your relationship with Jesus was
Amen.
really, really
Amen.
important. So what was it about the Midwest that you were like, I don't want to move to the Midwest? And how has your perception of the Midwest changed?
It's funny. I confess, okay, I grew up in San Diego. I'm a fifth generation Californian. These really are known as the flyover states. And I just didn't have a vision for them. I remember my first year that I lived in Northern Illinois, I just was like walking around going, Lord, show me your beauty here. It was like because I had done I'm a backpacker and had done a lot of backpacking in the eastern part of the Sierra, which is just really stark, but really beautiful in its own way, and have done a lot of hiking in the Rockies. And so I'm like, okay, this place is flat. And I mean, I just don't get it. But I have to say, I have come to love the lake. Lake Michigan is a
Hmm.
blessing for me. I have a trail that I walk almost every single day that goes right along the lake. I've learned to appreciate birds and trees in new ways and really just kind of, that experience of just being surrounded by lots of leaves and tree trunks. And, at first I didn't appreciate that so much because I'm kind of the person like, give me the vista, give me to be able to see out over, the Eastern Sierra. But I've come to appreciate some of those things. I've also been in my church for 28
Mm,
years and just that kind of, we're a really grounded, well-connected community, and I'm so thankful for them and just for really experiencing that kind of depth of community.
yeah, it's neat. I have a good friend named Matt. I run with him twice a week, and he loves birds and he loves trees. So it's too bad you guys didn't get time when you were here to talk birds and trees. He would have eaten that up and loved that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So let's talk about the work that you get to do. One of the things that we're doing with this podcast is we've titled this season On the Move. It's kind of like above my head right there. And the idea is like God is always present. He's always at work. He's doing things. He's on the move. I loved when you were here, you talked about in the luncheon when we were doing the survey of Acts, is that the main character in Acts is the gospel. And we've hit this part in Acts 8 as we're teaching through it now as a church where the gospel is going out from Jerusalem. Persecution hits. Stephen has just been martyred, and now the gospel is headed to Samaria. And it's just been interesting for me this week to even be reading that and seeing, oh, the gospel is working in people's lives, especially people who we may not expect to be recipients or those who are open to the gospel. So so let's talk about like the work that you get to do, specifically traveling and teaching internationally, and just what you see God doing in his church, in his people all over the world. Maybe share a little bit to start, like how you got to the point of, because not, maybe I'm naive, but I don't envision every seminary professor traveling all over the world. I'm sure they travel and they teach, but I would imagine it's just different for different people, and how you feel like that became something that was part of your calling to go teach wherever God leads you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I really appreciate about a place like Trinity is that a lot of us do travel and, go to places that are, probably inaccessible. I mean, I've got a colleague who goes to Sierra Leone. I was just 3 weeks ago in Medellin, Colombia. So, trying to really, I don't know, expand the breadth of what we're doing. But you're right. It's an individual preference. Some of my colleagues don't like to travel, and that's fine. That's completely fine. I think God really knew what he was doing. I've always been curious. I mean, that's kind of so how I recharge my battery personally is I learned something new. So, like for me, if I've been really working hard, I will go like to a museum or just start kind of, find some kind of podcast or whatever, just something that's kind of new that really gets me to thinking in new ways, and I just love that. So I think that's travel has always been a big part of that. I'm thankful that I've been able to travel a lot. I'm certainly open to it, but there's also I've had opportunities, a lot of them have come from, previous work, was a little bit of that, but also students, and so,
Mhm.
I always joke with my students, "Don't extend an invitation unless you're really serious because I'm likely to take you up on that."
You'll show
And
up.
so I'll show up. And so I think that's what I've really loved. But again, I I think part of it is that I am flexible. I mean, I didn't think I would end up being single, and so that gives a certain amount of freedom.
Mhm.
I'm thankful for that, I really am. I mean, to God be the glory, that's just the assignment that he gave me, but it's also given me the ability to be more flexible and that I can go and I'm not worried about childcare or school schedules or all those kinds of things that really are a part of most people's daily life. So I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that, I can have those opportunities. I think what I love most about it though is that I honestly feel like travel and experiencing God's people in different parts of the world has really opened up my vision for how big God is. We do not have a small God, and that has been a huge encouragement to me.
Yeah, say more about that in terms of how you see that actually play out, and what are the observations that you have about the bigness of God in those travels.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think about even where to start, but I mean, at almost kind of a superficial level, even different styles of worship. So when I was in Colombia, the very last day, I did annual lectures there, and on the very last day, they had a live band come for worship, and it was so joyous. I can't even describe, and really like some, I guess I'll say indigenous instruments. I
Mhm.
don't know enough about the instruments to be able to speak well about them, but they were different kinds of drums and different kinds of things like that. But the joy was just like spilling out and filling this room. And I've been in some places where I've had a similar experience. I actually preached in a large church in Kigali, Rwanda, and the worship there was so filled with joy and
Mm.
expression. I mean, our worship is really great in our church, and I'm very thankful for it, but there's just something, I don't know, where dance is just an incredible part of that worship. So I think at one level, it's just even things like that, that I just think, oh gosh, God is a God of this incredible overflowing joy. I don't sometimes, we get caught up in our daily life and we don't always see that kind of joy. So I'm thankful for those pictures. You can certainly find that kind of joy in worship services around here, but there was just something about experiencing it. And also, what's normal to people, like people there would not have noticed that per se because that's their normal church experience. That's one good thing about travel is that you're going into something that's not your normal church experience.
Mhm.
And, the people of God do things very differently and it's okay.
Yeah.
And I think I've really come to love that about the bigness of God, that he's not, I mean, I don't usually like to speak on God's behalf, but I don't think he's all that worried about how we do baptism or how we do the Lord's Supper. I think he's thrilled that we're doing those things in remembrance of what he has done on our behalf. And so I think that's partly where I see the bigness of God. But also another one, probably more profound, is in my experience and some of the believers I've met in different parts of the world, there's just a whole level of prayer that I'm not at.
Mm.
And I mean, people who have such incredible faith and pray for things and just believe that they are going to happen.
Mm.
And I've been blown away by just some of the stories. I'm also another thing that really sees again is the bigness of God is really the faithfulness of God.
Mm.
And I'll tell this story. I was teaching in the Czech Republic, and it was in Brno, which is the second largest city in Czechia. And the students, they wanted to take me out every night for dinner, which was great. Except that that meant that they wanted to ask me questions the whole time. And I had been like teaching 8 hours and then over dinner talking. And I was thinking, I'm not going to have enough energy to make it through at this rate. It's basically 12 to 14 hours of talking. So almost in desperation, I said, okay, tonight. So it was the first night and I kind of did the math and go, I'm not going to make it through this week. So the second night, out of desperation, I just said, okay, we're going to do something different tonight. And I want us to go around and everybody tell their testimony. I don't know that I've ever been more encouraged in my life. And now it's a practice that I've incorporated anywhere I go, is to just ask people, the group of people I'm with, to share their testimonies. That's where I really see the faithfulness of God. The things that God does to reach a person, the I mean, I'll just tell you one really quick story because this is just blew me away completely. This is actually not an overseas story, but a friend of mine originally came from India. She's Bengali, and even her family left India and they were traveling throughout Europe. And in the course of some of those times, she heard the gospel, but she was really resistant. And then she went to the same university that I did, and one of her roommates was a Christian and kept sharing the gospel. And she's like, I'm going to change roommates. I'm tired of this.
Mhm.
So she's really getting frustrated about these people who keep sharing the gospel with her. And she signs up at that point in time for a trip to Russia, which was then very, very accessible, and decides, okay, I'm going to just get away from all these Christians. And I'm done with this. I'm going to go to Russia because I know I'll be safe there.
Mhm.
He's in St. Petersburg in the Hermitage, which is a huge museum, and there's a state-sponsored museum guide who's taking them through explaining all the art. And at one point in time, they had gotten a little bit ahead of the group, and they're waiting for the group to catch up to them. He turns to her, and in Bengali,
Hmm.
they are in this, the former Soviet Union in Russia. In Bengali, he says to her, "You need to know Jesus." And she's just like, "Okay, I quit." I quit. Okay, so I mean, when you hear those kinds of stories, I just think the Lord is just
Yeah.
so faithful, and his love is so incredible that he will track somebody down to
Yeah.
St. Petersburg with one of probably the only people in that city who could speak Bengali to talk to this young woman in Bengali.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because so our first season of our podcast we did last year, we titled it Storytellers, which went along with a sermon series that we were doing, a big initiative for our church that we also titled Storytellers. That comes from Psalm 107, verse 2, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. And all we did on the last season was just create a space for people in our church to tell the story of how they came to know Jesus and what Jesus is doing in their life now, as well as when they first came to know the Lord. And I think there's so much power in somebody's story and hearing how God has worked, in and through their life because God really does amazing things. And I think you're right. It shows his faithfulness in the way that he pursues his people and the way that he tracks them down. And so that's really
Yeah.
great to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are you've learned a lot about like, okay, so this is the bigness of God as I've been able to travel and meet different people throughout the world as I teach them the scriptures. What are you sensing about what God is up to in and through his church, whether it be in your own church, in churches in the States, or even all over the world? What are you sensing that God is doing? Where is he on the move, if you will?
That's a really good question. I would say that it's a hard question for me to answer, to be honest, because I feel like there's a bit of a fracturing that's going on in the church, which is, I think, painful to see. I sense kind of, or what I'm drawn to, is really sensing a need for humility and really a need for being very, very honest about seeing only the gospel, or maybe even going further and saying only seeing Jesus. Like when I'm teaching Revelation, I always say that, Revelation is the true narrative that there is one king and one kingdom, because we're living with so many counterfeit narratives where other people are trying to be a king or they're trying to build their own kingdom. And so I find that right now I'm sensing in some parts of the church just a desire to come back to really focusing on Jesus
Hmm.
and to really focusing on his kingdom and his kingdom alone. I'm hesitant in kind of how I say this because at one level you could say the gospel is always political. And the best way to think about that is if you say that Jesus is Lord, then you're saying that Caesar is not.
Hmm.
Like by definition a political statement, because you're saying my trust is in Jesus ultimately, it's not in a king or a president or an elected official. I mean, that doesn't mean we don't participate in the life of government. I'm not saying that, but it has political implications right away. So I think what I see right now is some parts of the church, I think, from my humble outlook, feel like they have become more aligned with political aspirations and goals and think that that's the way to achieve the kingdom. And again, we live in a representational government. I'm saying, we should be involved. That's a good thing. But I sense also in other places that there's just a hunger for a movement of the spirit. There's a hunger for I guess the word that comes to mind is almost a clarifying, like just to see Jesus more clearly, to rely on the spirit more clearly, more fully. And that's the part that gets me really excited. I've noticed it in a couple of different contexts and where people are fatigued with some
Hmm.
of the polarization and just spiritually hungry and spiritually thirsty.
Hmm. Yeah, my travels are not nearly as vast as yours, but when I've had opportunity to connect with people in different spaces, whether it's teaching or whatever, I'm finding like people are eager. They want to grow. I think there's, and as I get to hear more and more people's stories, there's just a lot of pain. There's a lot of brokenness, and people are longing for healing, and they're longing for some measure of like, yes, can we stop fighting, and can we start to really see the body of Christ come together?
Yeah, definitely.
So, as we think of this idea of being on the move, and we think specifically of your story, you are going through a pretty significant change in your professional life right now. The school that I went to, Trinity, where you're teaching, is closing down, which means in the near future you have to figure out like what is next for me. And so, I'm curious for you to share a little bit about that, but also share how you're posturing yourself and how you're discerning what's next for me. One of the things we're really trying to teach our church is how to pay attention and participate with where God is at work in their life. And we believe that God is always leading us into new things, or he's leading us day by day. And so how do we get into the posture of being open to follow him? And how are you kind of working through that? And just maybe give us some of those kind of insights on how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so, I mean, to add just a few more details, the school is moving to British
Mhm.
Columbia and is being acquired by a university, which denominationally, that makes a lot of sense. The university was started by the same denomination, and then became the Evangelical Free Church of Canada, and now there's the Evangelical Free Church of America. I should say the Free Church of America started, and then the Canadians came up, had their own kind of, what do you want to say? I guess church polity. But as I prayed a lot about it and thought about it, it just became really clear that I should not be a part of that. I think it's going to be great. I'm really wanting to support that move in every way that I can. I think there's some good continuity that will happen, but for me personally, it was not clear to me, and it became very clear that I should not do this, that picking up everything and going to Canada wasn't the best option for me. And a lot of that has to do with how invested I am in my community. I'm very, very involved in a lot of aspects of my community. I live in a under-resourced community that could use a lot of love. And so I just wasn't really willing to say, okay, I didn't sense in my heart, let me say it that way. I'd be willing to do whatever God wants me to do, but I didn't feel a sense in my heart that it was time to leave that community and to leave my church and the involvement I have there. So I think what I've been kind of resting on, personally, what I've been trying to do this year, because I have a contract until the end of June, is I've been trying really hard to be fully present on campus. I know that I'm not going to Canada, and I know that what's happening here is closing down, but I also feel really, really strongly that I need to be 100% committed while I'm here. Invested in my students, invested in activities that are happening. There was a Thanksgiving celebration last night. Of course, go to that. Because I just feel like it's about relationships, and the relationships, we may not be physically in the same place, after this year, but it's important to really invest in students and to invest in colleagues and those kinds of things. So that's one thing that I've been trying to do this right now. The other thing that's been encouraging me is maybe I'll just preface it this way. The first time I ever preached in Trinity's chapel, I was really nervous. And a very dear brother came to me, and he was praying for me, and his prayer was something along the lines of, God's people are hungry and God is faithful to feed them.
Mm,
And that just really set me free on this
mm,
whole prospect of preaching, because I thought, well, it's not really about me. I'm basically fixing a meal and serving it, and it's about God feeding his people. So I guess in a sense, I'm kind of feeling like that, is that I think God has given me some gifts that he still wants to use, and it's really about him feeding his people. So I don't know where I'm gonna end up. I'm in the process of applying for a couple of things. I don't know what that's gonna look like at all. And yet I just keep thinking, God is faithful to feed his people, and to the extent that he wants me to be a part of that, then he's gonna put me someplace where I can do
mhm,
that. And I'm really trying to lean into that. I won't deny that it can be scary at times, but it's also kind of like, okay, it's not really about me. It's about being a part of the body of Christ and knowing that God will use the gifts that he's given to us freely for his glory. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out in the midst of that, you know, what does it look like to go forward?
yeah. So, how much of your desire to be connected to your community is also the community you're in now is also like kind of like guiding that decision? Because I say that from a standpoint when Becky and I were in a place in Atlanta, this would have been about 4 years, 3 or 4 years before we moved up here. We had this moment of something similar to what you said around. We were having a conversation with our neighbor. We knew there could be a possibility of like, hey, we could move, like we could go opportunity over here. And we had this conversation with our neighbor. I'll never forget. We were in our, like, just by our front door. She left to go back home, which was right across the street. We closed the door and we both looked at each other and we said, we're not ready to leave her yet. Like, and it was not just her, but it's like, we're not ready to leave these people yet. Like, there's still something with these people that is holding us here. And I think in my season of life, that was something that God used as a guide to say, yes, I want you right here. So how much of that would you say is also kind of where what you're sensing with your connection to your community?
Yeah, I'd say that's part of it for sure. I feel kind of like my involvement in the church, I'm very, very involved in church, as a lay leader. I'm thinking about getting ordained, as a deacon, but I'm involved as a lay leader, and I don't feel like that work is done, and I do kinda feel it that way. We've got some new families who've come in. I'm kind of involved in a range of things that, I kinda joke, it's like, one Sunday I'm holding babies in the nursery, the next Sunday I'm preaching, and a whole bunch of stuff in between, but I love that. I was involved with Vacation Bible, School this summer and really loved investing in the 3rd to 5th graders. And so I don't feel like that work is necessarily done. I'm a little bit limited in my community directly for what I can do because I don't speak Spanish. I can understand, but most of my neighbors speak Spanish. And so I've been trying to learn Spanish. I think opportunities to directly serve, well, I should say I can directly serve in ministries that don't involve speaking. So I've been involved in coat drives and food drops and all those kinds of things, which are really needed. I mean, really needed. But I imagine that those opportunities will open up more when I can speak more Spanish.
Yeah. So how is it that you then are actively looking for God's guidance through, like, is it you wake up every day and you're like, okay, Lord, maybe there's an opportunity today, or how are you posturing yourself on a daily basis to discern where he might be leading you?
That's a really good question. I mean, that is a live question right now. Some people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, some people are just really good at knowing how to promote themselves.
Hmm.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think
Right.
that's a positive. I can learn a lot from that. I'm not one of those people. And I tend to be much more, I mean, just as an example, there's a big story behind this, but just as an example, I really don't seek out preaching opportunities or teaching opportunities. I generally just say, "Okay, Lord, you're gonna bring to me whatever you're gonna bring to me, and I don't really need to start seeking those out." And that's really set me free. I just have never felt like I have a conflict of kind of priorities or whatever because it's not my idea. When something is presented to me, it's like, "Oh, wow, now I can think about that," but I hadn't
Hmm.
been thinking, "Well, I always wanted to do this," if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I feel, but unfortunately in a job market, you have to be a lot more proactive than that. One opportunity came to me. It looks like the door might be closing, but we'll see. Another opportunity I thought about and decided I would kind of talk to somebody about, what would this look like? I'll be talking to some people next week when I'm at some of the professional conferences. So I don't know, it's really it's a learning curve for me right now. I
Hmm.
don't know what it's like to just kind of, you know, I mean, knock on every door. I don't know. It's really it's a lot of it though. I really feel more than anything is just a massive invitation to trust the Lord. That sounds like the right answer, but I just find myself leaning hard into the reality that God loves me and that He doesn't make mistakes and that I don't think the work that he has for me is finished. And I really take a lot of comfort in Philippians, the very beginning of Philippians 1:6, where it says that, um, for I am convinced that he who began a good work in you will carry it on
Yeah.
to completion. Or in Ephesians 2:10, it talks about the good works that God has already prepared for us to walk into. I'm holding on to those.
Yeah.
I'm holding on to those, just going, okay, Lord, I don't think what you're asking me to do is done, so I don't know where you want me to go.
Yeah. I'm trying to ask everybody we have on this podcast that question. We're bringing people who are kind of in places where they're trying to discern or have discerned some sort of engagement with God moving forward in their life, and not that I'm trying to like formulate an equation but it just feels like there's this kind of like intangible, either there's a restlessness or there's a sense of peace or there's moments of clarity that come in unexpected ways. And it feels like the more I'm thinking about how do you discern where God is on the move, part of it is you just keep walking by faith and you keep walking by trust and you just keep saying like, Lord, I'm looking and I'm at some point I know you're going to bring it to me, but there is not so much a clear formula that you can put out there for people. Like if you do A, then B, and then C, you'll get your result. It's more you really have to lean into kind of like where we started today, this relationship with God, to be with him and trust that he will open those doors for you when the time is right.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, 2 things that have really encouraged me. One, a friend just kinda said this in an offhand way, which, that's often how we hear things, but she just said that God is really strategic in the way that he
Mm,
shakes things up.
mhm.
And I wasn't a year ago, I had no idea that this I'd be in this situation at all. And I mean, actually even 6 months ago, I didn't. And so I just have to trust that, again, if God is being strategic, then he wants some of us to be in different places, and he's gonna faithfully do that. I think the other thing that I've been really, really hanging on to, and it's something I did say in the with the staff retreat about Revelation, is that the reality of who God is, so whether I wanna think about that in terms of God's love or think about God enthroned in heaven, however I wanna think about that, the reality of who God is greater than any reality I'm facing right now. And that has really encouraged me, is just to keep thinking, okay, I mean, I personally feel like in the scope of our lives, everything is important. So I could say, "Oh, my little job is not important." No, my little job is important, and it's important to God. And I think I've just really come to realize, okay, it's important to him because I'm important to him, and he's gonna take care of it. And it's okay that I have a range of emotions. It's okay that, I but that reality of who he is greater than any of the realities I'm facing. And that really helps a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that might be good place to begin to wind down, in part because that's a really good word, and in part because I need to go pick up a kid from school in a few minutes. We got started a little late because of some technical difficulties. But yeah, if you could just kind of like say one other thing about that. Is there any way that you would kind of put a period behind our conversation around, God's greatness, God's bigness, and how the work we all do is important to him as a way to kinda sum up our conversation, what would that be?
I mean, I the first thing that comes to mind is something I also said at the retreat, but, it's just the two-word focus that we all need, and that is God wins.
Yeah.
God God wins. And I think sometimes we can lose sight of that basic reality that God wins. But also, I think what I become struck by in my life is I'm not sure how best to say it, but I think in some respects I can say it this way, that the only reality is God's love.
Hmm.
He creates out of love. He redeems out of love. Every single thing that we think about with God doing something, it goes back to being originated in love. And I think that's just really been helping me a lot to just stay grounded, is that the reality is of God's love is, it anchors everything. So if we're trying to think about how do I fit into God's plan, maybe it does go back to that Mark 3:14 where Jesus wants to be with us. I mean, yes, he does. We live in a material world, so he does care about mortgages, he does care about jobs, he does care about childcare, all of those things, of course. But in the context of his incredible love for us and his victory, you know? And I think that, I think one thing I've learned in the process of my so far in my life has been that I really can relax because God wants to be with me. It's not the generation of all of the energy and all of those kinds of things. It's that he really wants to be with me. And that looks different at different seasons. I mean, there's some seasons where that can look like I can just be quiet and still. In other seasons, it actually looks like learning how to, even in my mind's eye, just to be able to say, okay, I'm setting this over here and Jesus is going to take care of it. Even if I've got 20 appointments or I'm running to a class or I'm doing all these other kinds of things. So there's nothing formulaic about it. It's just something inside of going, okay, the most important thing for me to hang on to is God's love expressed in his son, Jesus Christ. And that just kind of, I don't know. It's incredible to think that God really loves us that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. As big as he is, as great as he is, as small as we are, he is very, very well aware. We like to say the phrase when we talk about people coming in and out of our church that we want people to be seen and we want them to be known. That's kind of hard for us to do with everybody all the time, but somehow God is able to do that. And we only have a few hundred people who are coming in and out of our church, and he's got everybody on the world, and he sees and he knows, and his love is deep for you. So, my hope is that for those who are tuning in today, that's an encouragement to you to know that you are seen, that you are known, that you are loved, and there's an invitation from God to be with him. And no matter what you're kind of working through or what guidance you're looking for, that as you lean into relationship with him, you might find that it is the relationship with him that really is the thing that gives you the guidance rather than a plan, a formula, or a next step. But it's him, and he is the thing that you really, really want and need. Dana, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's great to catch up again, and just super grateful that we, as a church, were able to spend the time with you. So thank you so
Well,
much.
thanks for inviting me. I had fun. That was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and hopefully this isn't the last time, too.
Sounds good. Sounds
All right.
good.
Take
Okay.
care.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody, we'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great rest of your week.